Well, I think before we get started properly, we need to give credit where credit is due, right? Because I found out walking over here that today is your wedding anniversary.
Oh.
That's right.
So I think Angela needs a big round of applause.
What do you mean she needs a round of applause?
Well, you know what I mean. We all know what I mean. We all know what I mean. But no, seriously, congratulations. It's a huge day for you. The book is so much fun. They haven't read it yet, but I can go ahead and predict that you have set the Guinness Book of World Records for the most Memphis references in a novel.
It is a very Memphis book.
Yeah, in the best way. It's like very saturated, and I know you know the hell out of that town, and I'm curious what your research budget is for all those Memphis spies.
You know, I guess I've been here for almost 25 years, and I consider, obviously, Oxford is my, hometown here, but Memphis is my home city. And for those of us who live here in Oxford, I mean, let's face it, you got to go to Costco, you got to go to see a doctor, you got to, you want to get out of town, whatever. Memphis is a place to go, a place to fly out of. And so I have known and loved Memphis for quite some time. I did work, actually my very first novel had references to Memphis about it. It's a cool, special, kind of crazy city. And so for this one, I wanted to write completely about Memphis.
Well, you did in a hell of a way, and I thought it was interesting too that it's not just Memphis, but it's other places. Like it's got a real, reach. It's got a real span.
Yeah, I mean, there are scenes in, not to throw you guys, because we were talking about Memphis, and I got to explain to people. There's also a few scenes in Dubai. So it's Memphis and Dubai and Cairo. So it's a pretty
And then a little France too.
Little France too, little Paris, yeah.
Which 30 miles, my God, that makes me tired. However, I get the sense, I've got the sense talking to you about this book and seeing your social media and stuff and just what people are saying about it. You get the sense you got a little giddy up about this book, you're really enthused about it, and I wonder how much of that has to do with it being not a Quinn Colson and not a Parker, but its own little contained world.
Yeah, I mean, for the last 10, 11 years, I've been writing about the same characters, the same world, and don't get me wrong, I love writing the books about Quinn Colson and down there in Tillamook County and those characters. They're so very near and dear to my heart, and I can't wait to go back and write about them again. But it was nice to kind of change it up a little bit, write about a new world, write about new characters, and really not have any kind of limitations. Not that I, necessarily had any limitations on writing anything for. Yes, sir.
Talking to Mike.
Oh,
Speaking loud.
Limitations for Quinn Colson, but for me, I can do a scene in Paris. I can do a scene in Dubai. I can bring in, Russian mercenaries. I can do whatever I want to, and that was a lot of fun. Yeah, very very freeing.
It felt to me like a reading, which was very cool, not like a period piece. That's not, well, maybe not like historical fiction, but more like a period piece. Almost as if I was when you watch it in contained series on, Netflix or something, it's got that vibe of that city and that place and those certain couple of, during that certain year, that you can really feel.
It is kind of a period piece. It's funny, as you get older, things that you don't think of as period pieces. When I think about period pieces, I think about people wearing corsets and old-timey cars. That's a period piece. But this book is set, in 2010, and there's another project I want to work on is set, in the 90s, and I'm actually currently working on a book set in the 80s. I don't think about them as period pieces, but I guess they are.
I know it's weird, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know what's wrong with people.
It's the musical references, that as I was reading it, that was kind of recurring to me, I get it. But I heard the other day, I was riding around, flipping the radio around on classic rock station, Pearl Jam came on, and I was like, what?
Yeah.
Because we associate those things and those moments with our, not now.
Yeah.
We still feel like that person who's hearing that for the first time.
I think when I think about classic, rock and roll, it's the Beatles and the Stones and stuff. It's the Doors, but now we're listening to, and the classic rock and roll is Guns N' Roses Roses.
Yeah, sounds right.
Nirvana. I think that's absolutely wrong. But for this book, it certainly, is even, music before I was born, but music that was very important to me, music that I absolutely loved. And it's, really everything. It was really the genesis of this book to be able to, write about Stax Records. And, that's the place where, there's Otis Redding, Booker T and MG's, Johnny Taylor. To me, that's the greatest music that's ever been made. But it's funny when you talk about people who don't remember certain things or have that musical connection. There's a terrific documentary right now on HBO about Stax Records that you guys should watch. And as it started, it was trying to explain to people, what is Stax Records? Who is Otis Redding? Those things that I just take as common currency, but for a whole generation or two or three generations, they don't know who those people are. And that's what's important about, getting people to remember those wonderful musicians in that time and remember that Memphis was a powerhouse in the 1960s.
Well, I think it'd be impossible to write a novel about Memphis, a good novel about Memphis, without talking about music, at least in the comings and goings, right, of the characters. But also, considering you don't really know who people are, talk about Joanna, man. I thought she was one hell of a damn
Thanks for
character.
asking. This is a very hard novel to explain because you talk about, I talk about that it's got international intrigue, but it's also about a woman trying to find out the identity of her husband, but it's also about this woman named Joanna Grayson, who had been a co-star of Elvis's back in the 1960s. And she had been a star in a film called Easy Come, Easy Go. And there's a connection to her and a few women that had co-starred with Elvis that later on showed up in Memphis that I've seen over the last 25 years that end up kind of eking out a living doing as they call, like the nostalgia circuit. She has a self-published book called One Night with You, and she does, at those little books, you see those really odd little places near Graceland that are not officially sanctioned by Graceland, but they're, Elvis's treasures or the King's treasures or whatever. That's where Joanna Grayson would be signing her books. And she's British. She was kind of the it girl in the mid-1960s. And unfortunately, her career, that's about as far as it got, was making that movie with Elvis, and her association is always tied in with that. So she moves to Graceland, and, she becomes a star by her own right, doing book signings, that kind of thing.
And the cool thing about her is she's so much more than that. I really love what you did with her, is like just humanizing her and making her very real. Because just the way Ace talks about her, it sounds kind of a little pathetic, right? And when I first came across her and saw, well, this is her life, I felt bad for her, a little bit. But then there were moments when I felt like, well, she's really got it figured out, and she really, even now, is doing exactly what she wants to be doing. Like, she likes sitting there with her self-published book, in the fake, Elvis, little pockets of place with when 4 people come in over the course of 2 hours. But she gets to talk about it. She still gets to live that, and I think her role in the story too, became just much truer to life. I think than.
I think she just Joanna kind of feeds on that attention and that. But I think ultimately for Joanna, she's in her mid to late 60s at this time. She's a survivor, and she's doing what she needs to do to not only, make a living, but also, keep this crappy apartment, in parts of Memphis, and to be able to, help out her daughter. And she's just been a star for so long. She started off working with Elvis, and then she starts making horror movies, and then she's making, straight to Cinemax films and whatever, and all of a sudden she's in her 60s, and what do you do with her life? But I respect Joanna. I like the fact that she's a striver. I mean, she's going to do what needs to be done to take care of her family.
Well, I agree. You call her a survivor. I see that in her, but I see that in several of the characters, that survival mode, like Addison clearly, and just the whole thing that's going on, and the detective who's working with her, the private dick who's working with her. But it's just like it does seem like the theme of being a survivor comes up over and over.
Yeah, I mean, this is there's several different characters, and I mean the question of this puzzle is how do they all fit together, and how do their lives all come together? And there is Joanna and her story and her connection with Elvis and her dealings with antiquities and what exactly is she doing in the story. And then then there's Addison, and Addison McKellar is a woman who is in her late 30s, almost 40. She has 2 kids, a boy and a girl. They go to very good schools. They go to, Hutchinson and Presbyterian Day School. She is very connected with Memphis. Her husband is in the Memphis crew and the Boll Weevils and all those people. And I don't tell you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. And she lives in Central Gardens. She drives a big SUV. And I think when we first meet Addison, we think that she is kind of a, for lack of a better term, kind of a, privileged character. Mm-hmm. And we think that she's, there's just this white lady in Memphis that's oblivious to everything else and living her own life and going to the Memphis Country Club or whatever. But, that's originally how she was sketched. But later on, she, I couldn't live with her like that. I really wanted her to be much more. And so, we find out later, she's not this just privileged white woman. She's actually Lebanese. And she has this connection to this, this rich Lebanese history in the city of Memphis. Her father owns this barbecue restaurant. Her father is actually dying at the time of this book. He's very connected to some kind of sordid details in underground community in Memphis. And when her husband disappears and she has questions about who he is, where he is, and his identity when he doesn't show up after a business trip, it's actually her father, this guy named Sammy Hassan, they call Sam the Sham, that introduces her to this man, Porter Hayes, who is a legend in the city of Memphis.
Yeah. Well, I know, y'all are going to be reading this and you're going to be going, is Ace making fun of these people? And the answer, I think, emphatically is yes. Which is, the way it should be. However, she did surprise me too, because, but it's the thing that makes novels and storytelling good is that the character you meet on the page that you meet them, it does not end up being the person who you finish the story with. They evolve and they take chances or they do things you don't expect. And I think necessity forced her out of that comfort of private school and $8 Starbucks and yoga pants and into being
she's also an Ole Miss grad.
Yeah.
She's a sorority girl here at Ole Miss. And ends up meeting her dream husband as she's working in publicity in New York and then goes back to Memphis.
It's a great American tale.
I've seen it many times.
So what did it take you, how long did it take you to write this book? Knowing your career now, 3 weeks?
I wish. This book, this was, year and a half. I had been on a pretty tight turn with novels for the last 10 or 11 years, and the idea of writing this book was to give myself a little bit of, room to really expand and do exactly what I wanted with this story. And this was a novel, just the idea about identity and marriage and, waking up next to somebody, I'll see the looks in the audience as I say this, waking up next to somebody that you don't really know who they are. And you may have been, you see that all the time, especially around here where you see people getting married so quickly, getting married at 22 years old, 23 years old. How well do you know these people? Who are they really? And that's what Addison is going through. And so that was one of the core elements of this book. I knew I wanted to write Memphis, but I wanted to write a story about somebody who has been in a marriage for 15 years. This is not what I call a run and gasp kind of book. When the husband disappears, Addison is not freaked out. Addison is not like, oh my God, my husband, I love him so much, where is he? I mean, she really thinks her husband's kind of an asshole, and he's been kind of distracted, he's been removed from the family, he's not, and so she's really pissed off. She really wants to just find out, what the hell have I been doing for the last 15 years of my life? And in the book, she's somewhat unraveling, and it's through her relationship with this friend of her father's, Porter Hayes, did they get into this larger conspiracy.
Once again, happy anniversary, Angela.
I knew exactly what you were saying that. My wife may or may not be a KGB assassin.
That's right. You don't know, man. You don't know. I will say there's a there's a lot of high seriousness to this, and thematically and so forth. There was a playfulness to this too, and that makes it sense in you saying what you said about this was going to be its own story. It wasn't falling in line with anything else. I took a year and a half to do it. I got that sense that there was just some opening up and some playfulness in it too.
I think so. I think it's funny. It's very hard. I think that in the publishing industry, I've been years, you get really pigeonholed. And what kind of writer are you? You write this kind of book, and what is your genre? And what do you do? And that kind of stuff. And part of the fun of this book was going, I don't know. I mean, what is this book? You know, it's a thriller, but I think most people think a thriller is like there's a serial killer coming after somebody, and you know, people are running and gasping, and oh god. And this book is, I think, at the heart of it, really a comedy. I think it's a dark comedy, but it's also kind of what they would call a domestic suspense. It's an international thriller. It is, you know, a crime novel. It has a PI, but it also has, you know, connections to Moscow. And so I just kind of blended all the things that I really enjoyed, you know, along with a setting like the city of Memphis, which is, you know, just incredibly interesting to me.
Well, I thought you did teenagers really well too. Having two teenagers, I thought the teenagers were created.
I don't have teenage girls, but I have friends that have teenage girls,
Yes,
so
you
I
do.
borrowed a lot of that.
Well, the teenage stuff was, you know, spot on. I mean, I could keep asking questions, but I got a feeling there's a lot of people here to see you who might have questions too. And,
I will tack onto that question though, is I hate in books where there are characters who are parents, and then the shit starts flying, and they're not actually having to parent. Like they're not actually having to take care of the kids. They're like, oh, I'll go to grandma's house, and then I'll figure this out later. So I wanted to also write a book where actually you had a character like Addison who actually was having to deal with her kids. Like her life is unraveling. That you know, she doesn't even know who her husband is, and you know what's going on. Her bank account is drained, but at the same time, she has to get her son to, you know, school. She also has to go to a soccer game.
Right.
All that stuff.
well, I thought that was a very cool thing too, because like she's in this tremendous situation, but she's also like life does not stop. We've all been through this when something bad happens or something different happens, and it doesn't mean like you can just push pause on everything else, especially when you have kids. And I thought it was a very smart move and interesting to keep her in that pattern, try to keep her in the pattern of their lives, because I think the interesting thing about telling stories and writing stories is keeping people in the same room and having them deal with it versus, you know, sending the kids to grandma's and then you don't have to deal with it. Like that added layer of complexity, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think for this, I mean, I certainly wanted to establish these characters, that the characters are first and foremost for me, know who I was dealing with, and let their lives kind of play out in this situation. But I'm not one of those writers or thriller writers where plot is everything. I mean, I'll be honest with you, the plot is okay or whatever. I mean, there's interesting things that happen, and there's something they're chasing after, whatever. But that's not what I do. I really do something, hopefully, with characters and bringing them alive and with real world situations.
Well, you do that, and I think the story kind of starts telling itself. You don't have to worry about plot because you're creating real people and with real problems, and it just kind of shows itself.
Well, I think if you don't care about the characters, you don't care what they're doing, you don't believe who they are, then it doesn't really matter, you know, what's happening. It doesn't matter what the story's happening because you're not invested in it. So for me, you know, Addison, you know, Porter Hayes came first, and then there's Addison, and then there's Joanna, and then it just came from there.
Porter Hayes is great because I could just like feel kind of like he's like 70. I could like feel his life in Memphis in him, you know, because a lot of shit happens over the course of 70 years, especially in the South, to a man who's not white, right? And they've been through, they've seen a lot, they've experienced a lot of things that we can't understand, and like I could kind of feel that in him, like realizing what he'd seen and heard, felt.
I think in a weird way, I don't necessarily feel like I created Porter Hayes. I feel like I'm kind of his press agent because I've met people who are like Porter Hayes, but here's a guy who was, you know, police officer at the time of the MLK assassination. He was a guy that very early on became a private detective in the 1970s. He was somebody who had a very solid friendship with Elvis Presley. He's seen everything in Memphis. He's seen Memphis grow and change. He's seen Memphis at its height, and he's seen it evolve. And he knows exactly how all that stuff happens. So Porter Hayes is somebody I have been thinking about for, oh my God, for 10, 12 years and wanting to write about him. So that piece of the puzzle came in. But I know men like Porter Hayes, you know, they've got it all figured out. And, he was a wonderful character to write.
Yeah, you could tell he'd been kind of in your noggin for a while, for somebody like him.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Questions from people other than me? About the past, present, or future of one Ace Atkins? Yes.
Okay, I didn't want to be the first, but I guess I'll be the first. I started reading you with your very first novel with Nick Travers.
Well, thank you. The gentleman said he started reading me with my very first novel, so he's one of 50 people.
What I was going to say, you teased us a few years ago with a short story. Are we ever going to see Nick again?
I think so. This gentleman who's not a plant is asking about the very first books. Those books led me to Mississippi almost 25 years ago, and writing about the blues, blues history, music history, and a character named Nick Travers, who was a former New Orleans saint, and I love writing those books. And recently, they've just gotten a new life in audio. There's a terrific narrator, a guy named Dion Graham, who's re-recorded those books. And I think because of that, I have a kind of a renewed energy about them. So if the business worked out for that and the opportunity came about, I would love to continue those stories. I think there's plenty of stories to tell in New Orleans and certainly in Mississippi with him.
Well, I know you'd sell at least twice as many as before.
You never know. Always write what you love.
Yes, sir.
Ace, when you were turning out 2 novels a year, your daily, weekly routine had to be pretty rigid. Were you able to relax a little more with this one, or are you doing other projects and still spending as much time writing?
Yeah, my buddy Hank here is concerned about my health, and I appreciate it. I was writing 2 books a year, and that was that turn of 6 month turn. I think as I get older, and I've been doing this for so long, I don't know, keeping up that routine was difficult. I could do it, but I think part of it, I would do it again if the right opportunity came about. I mean, one of the things, like, I love writing the Ken Colson books. I love writing about North Mississippi. I love writing about the music and the characters and people here. And I can go down to Calhoun County and just soak it up. My buddy Greg Polland, and I'm right there in Tillahaw County. So I'm hoping I can go back and do that. But I also was working for the Robert P. Parker estate. And while that was very fun and a great honor to do that, I think ultimately why I got off doing that after 10 books was no matter what I do with those stories, they're never my own. And so for me, I'd rather write more Porter Hayes books. I'd rather write more Quinn Colson books. So the slowdown was more about just taking on a new project, but not necessarily about the production schedule. I still could do it.
Anybody who's been friends with Ace for the past 6 or 7 years through those 2 books a year saying, this is what it's like. You bump into him on the square, out of his office or whatever. You see him somewhere around town. He's like, hey, let's get a drink or smoke a cigar sometime. Well, I would, but I'm on a deadline. Yeah, all right, well, I'll leave him alone for a few weeks. And I'll see him again. And you almost there? Yeah, I'm on a deadline. That's like, okay. So about a month to go by, I'm like, well, maybe Ace is caught up now. He's done. I'll check in with him. Ace, you want to go smoke a cigar? I'm on a deadline. Damn, man, when are you not on a deadline? I know that's what your life was like for a while. But...
Well, I mean, the goal for me right now, as a molar person looking, is to drink and to smoke more.
I think we can all in Oxford applaud that sentiment.
It's an Oxford thing, for sure.
Good.
It probably is a spoiler, but could you explain the title of the book?
Yeah, talk about the title, Don't Let the Devil Ride. Man, do you have problems with your titles?
No, man, I'm a genius with titles.
How often do you get, like, I mean, you've had some great titles, but how often do you get them just knocked down?
Sometimes they happen in the first shot, sometimes it's the 6th one, 6th or 7th or 8th one.
I didn't really have a problem with the titles, like with the Quinn Colson books. Those were kind of like the titles I usually wrote them under. That kind of came first, and then thematically worked out. This book was written under the title Suspicious Minds. And so I like Suspicious Minds, obviously, with the time with Elvis and everything like that. And I love that song. But it just wasn't working for the publisher. So we went through, I'm not kidding, hundreds and hundreds of titles on this. And I knew I wanted at least to have something that felt like Memphis, felt like, soul or gospel or whatever. And so I submitted this title at one point, and then it got dismissed and whatever. And then we went through another 100 titles, and I come back and I said, "How about this? Don't Let the Devil Ride." And it's a classic gospel song. I don't think it has it's public domain, which makes publishers very happy. They don't like to use anything that, it's tied in with songs. But I just love that song, Don't Let the Devil Ride. And there was an opportunity in the book to mention that line where something very awful, very terrible happens. And that's one of the characters mentions is, you know what happens when the devil rides. And, which is, he's going to want to drive is the line. And so I love that song. And so that's how it came about.
Yeah, it fits. It's a great title. Sid, do you have a question?
Yeah, been around Michael some and talked to him, but getting back to the way you wrote, and kind of know how he schedules. On your writing, do you just write when you're in the mood, or do you have a set schedule, like a work schedule, or?
Question is, do I write only when I'm in the mood, or do I have a set schedule? I think if I wrote only when I was in the mood, I'd never write. There are days that things are great, and things are flowing, and it's wonderful, and then there's days that you want to, I have my office right, a few buildings down, I want to just take it, throw that laptop out in the square. So you have to fight through those times, and you have to make the time to treat it like a business. And I think, I was talking to somebody recently, I think I was talking to my wife about this, is that, I think some people have the expectations of the perception of the writer that we're just off doing things, we're just enjoying life and having cocktails and everything is great, whatever. But they don't see, because that's the only time, another writer had mentioned this, that's the only time that they see us. They only see us when we're out having cocktails. They only see us when we're out doing fun things or doing events like this or whatever. They don't see us when we're sitting in our office and crying, our forehead and ramming it against the wall. I mean, it's one of the things that makes me mad about it. Very mad is when I hear people say, "Oh wow, it must be nice to be a writer and not have a real job." Great, because you never leave it. You don't. When you're a writer, you're never on vacation. I mean, if there's an idea I get tonight, I'm sketching it out. When I'm out on a book tour, I'm researching the next book. It never stops.
Yes.
Do you see any of yourself in any of your three characters, Nick and Quinn or New Porter, that you've just written about? Because I'm a big fan of Nick with your first books with Dirty South and Crossroad and Leaving Town.
Well, thank you very much. Questions about, do I see myself? I think the older I get, the less alter ego type characters that I have, where I'm putting myself, this is my idealized character. However, I would say with Nick, that was the case. I think that Nick Travers was like my idealized self and who I would, want to be or that kind of thing. But as I get older, I'm kind of sick of myself. And so I don't necessarily, want to spend, I like doing, getting into other characters and doing stuff like Joanna or Addison or Porter, who are not really like me at all. And I'm really not like Quinn Colson at all. I mean, Quinn Colson is very ramrod straight, disciplined. He gets up at 5 a.m. and goes for a big run. I mean, that's not me. So I enjoy writing about characters who are very different from me. But I would say probably Nick is probably the closest.
Yes, sir.
You said you sketch it out. Do you sketch out your novels, or do you write by the seat of your pants?
I do both. Question, and that's always the question you always get is like, how do you write? Do you have an idea of what you're doing beforehand, or do you just, sit down and write? And I think Raymond Chandler famously just liked to sit down and just write. And he said that was the joy of every day, sitting down, what's going to happen on the page, and having no idea, having no notes. I have kind of a loose idea, but I don't necessarily. I'm not married to it. If I'm working on something, and it's just not working out on the page. Look, I have this character, Gaudier, who is this really snobbish Frenchman, arms dealer, and he was just kind of a character who showed up in chapter 3. And I had no idea that he was just going to be there, and he was just kind of a connector to another story. But I enjoyed writing him so much, he just kept on showing up and showing up. So I kind of have a loose plan of what the story is, but then at some point I still am kind of fluid in the idea that I'm fine with changing that. So I don't like to be married to any ideas. I went to a conference one time, and this guy was just nuts. He was a sort of writer. And somebody asked me that question about planning ahead, and he unfurled this 10-foot document where he had put all of this crap in about the characters and what was going to happen. And he said he didn't write a page before he did this. I thought, I should just write the damn book, man. I write all these damn notes. It sounds awful. Because I think you should have some spontaneity and some.
I mean, that's homework.
It is different. And that's why we became writers.
That's
So we
right,
had to
I don't
go.
like that word. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Keith Richards wrote his famous riff for Satisfaction when he woke up in the middle of the night, and it just came to him, and he had his recorder there, and he recorded it. You ever find yourself waking up in the middle of the night and say, I gotta write this down before I forget it?
Yeah, for sure. It's like, do you get ideas in the middle of the night for a story? For sure. Yeah, there's been a lot of times, and I keep a notebook by the side of my bed because sometimes something that I can't figure out during the day will come to me later on, and I'll write it out. And there's times that it just clicks perfectly, and then there's morning where I'm drinking coffee and I'm looking at it and going, what the hell is this? It makes no sense what I'm talking about. And in the middle of the night, I think, boy, this is genius. You know? But there are points where, you just, because if you don't write it down, you'll lose it. Or for me, anyway, I'll lose it.
Yes, sir.
In your writing, sounds like the novel, which I have yet to read, is kind of scattered all over the place. How much, in different settings, how much research and did you have to do in this novel before you could kind of sit down and finish it up and make it believable?
I think gentleman was asking about how much research I had to do for this book, but I think the fun thing for this book, I really didn't do a lot of research because it's all the stuff that I love, and that was the genesis of the book. It's like, hey, I'm just going to write about stuff I care about. I'm going to write about spies and private investigators and Elvis and soul music and Memphis, and so I could just sit down and not that I didn't have to figure it out and I didn't have to make the story work, but it wasn't something that was completely unfamiliar to me. I mean, I've written stories like that. I've written books where I've had to do a ton of research. I wrote a book about 1921 San Francisco and a very famous court case, and I had to go through court records and autopsy things and whatever. And I've done that stuff before, and it's ultimately a good thing, but it's a lot of work. And so this one was hopefully a lot of fun because I could just sit down and start writing about things I really care deeply about.
Do you want to read?
I don't think so. I think these people's asses are very sore. I'm not judging. The only thing, after 25 years in this business, I can tell. I will be delighted to sign the books. Also, as I'm signing the books, answer any questions you have. And Michael, I want to thank you very much for doing this. It is fun after you work so long, after a year and a half, you get the book out, is to sit down with your pals and talk about it. It's just very enjoyable, and I'm sure all of you know Michael's books, but they are terrific. And I would not have asked you if I was not a fan and enjoyed everything you did. So thanks for your time.
Well, of course, it's an honor to be here.